she wanted Jesus to feel that he had good friends. It's really important. She was almost very motherly to Jesus in how she speaks about him. She was like, we want Jesus' sisters and his daughters and his women to feel like they have a good friendship with him, in order that the community would flourish. Basically, that was the idea. She didn't like the notion of going it alone for too long in Carmel. So what you've got, after what we've just spoken about, you have the desert experience of 2 hours a day, private prayer, which is what they call the desert prayer, and then you also have your time in community. So like the early desert fathers, like Elijah, you've got that balance of your silent time and your community time, which she thought was very healthy, because we're social beings. We're supposed to be around each other. It's not actually that healthy to be on your own for too long, because there's the danger that you'll go in on yourself. And so she said it's important that we keep having that ebb and flow, if you like, of community and silent life, following the example of those early hermits. So Carmel, if you like, is a community of hermits. Carmel is a very, very silent order. We're not talking all the time. It's very, very quiet. In contrast to that, I visited the Poor Clares, and one time during Vespers, there were some lovely African sisters in the community, and they would be banging drums in the chapel at Vespers and evening prayer. And it was a little bit like the opening of The Lion King, when you go into the chapel and they're all banging. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And at one point, I freaked out my prioress, because I was looking as if I might go and join the Poor Clares, because they were so visual and it was so happy and joyful. And then I got back to Carmel and there was just nothing. So there was no noise, and I was like, okay, don't make noise, so Saint Teresa, just keep quiet, please. There was such a contrast, but eventually that solitude of Carmel became what I found most attractive. So the charisms are different, and there is something for everyone, but you definitely wouldn't get banging of drums in the Carmelite chapel at all. So the idea was, with that silence, is that we have space for the Lord to infuse everything we're doing during the day. And the more you live that life, the deeper you actually go. And I found, for me personally, doing the chores was actually my way that I felt most connected to God. So the hoovering, the ironing, anything that you might think is mundane, I actually found the most profound, because when you focus on something, it's what the mind, body and spirit world call mindfulness. It's very similar. When you focus and you're absorbed in something and you're freeing up your mind, or like your mental faculties, if you like, you can go deeper with God, and you're not necessarily aware that you are, because you're not really thinking, you're just absorbed, and the work is happening. And I said to my novice mistress, when I'm hoovering, I find I'm more connected than when I'm physically in the chapel with my hands together doing the physical prayers, because obviously the Holy Spirit can reach us anywhere. So I said to her, I want to hoover some more. So she was like, okay, you can hoover this stairs, that stairs, this stairs. I ended up hoovering the entire monastery just so I could keep this. And it sounds crazy. And like Teresa is known for saying, the Lord will be found among the pots and pans. And then I added on the hoover. And then the prioress, this is funny, the prioress said to me, okay, let's see how enthusiastic you are about cleaning the toilets then. So I thought, right, she's not going to get me on this one, probably testing my zest. And I thought, no, I'm going straight upstairs to the top bathroom, to the cubicles, to clean all 8 toilets and come back down. So I've done it, and she was like, there's nothing to tie. Because it was being in that silent space, whether it's a toilet, it might sound a bit gross, but it's true, So the Lord is found among the pots, pans, the hoover, and now the bathroom. So I would highly recommend lots and lots of cleaning. But it's literally, and I'm joking about it, but it literally is that message that the more absorbed you are in something, the more the Lord can come to you, because you're not consciously, it's not a thinking thing, you're not consciously thinking about it, you're allowing things to happen. So I found that was really where I wanted to be more. So I had to leave the monastery, because there was so much of the divine office, so much of the said prayers, the Hail Marys, the Our Fathers in the chapel, that it was just a little bit much for me personally. Obviously the sisters in there absolutely love it, and they're so dedicated and they're called to that life. But I found I was called more to the desert experience, if you like, what we were just sharing, more solitude during the day. And I felt so grateful, actually, because I'd seen that. I'd seen the Poor Clares, I'd stayed with the Benedictines, I'd seen the Carmelite, to really find out what was right for me. And there's always something for everyone in the church, which is absolutely wonderful. There's nobody left out, if you like. So back to Saint Teresa's life. She was living in 16th century Spain, and at that time it was a very, very difficult time for her politically. She was born during the Spanish Inquisition and the increasing growth of the Protestant Reformation. So she began to play her part in what's called the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic revival. She was so keen, like the prophet Elijah, full of zest to defend the worship of Yahweh. She, in her way, with her sisters and also with the help of John of the Cross, wanted to say to people, we must defend the Catholic Church. We have to defend the faith, the doctrine, and the importance of prayer. So she was born in 1515 in Avila, and when she entered that convent, she found it was just far too relaxed. She said it was like the sisters were visiting their grandmothers, and all these people were coming into the convent for tea and cake, a little bit like this morning. And she was like, "What's happening? We're supposed to be praying," you know. And it was very sociable in those days. And she said, "We can't. How are we supposed to contact God if we're sort of chatting away all day long? It's not going to work. We have to be quiet." And of course, as always happens with the saints, they come up against great trials and turbulation, people bullying her and saying, "You can't found monasteries all over Spain. Why do you need more prayer? Why do you need more prayer?" You know, and she's saying, because of this, and this, it's important. You know, she was really, really keen that the Catholic Church had more followers. So she was really fighting for converts, if you like. And I can't not mention at the same time as Saint Teresa, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, so another Spanish saint, really, really, really pivotal in bringing about the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic revival. He was going around educating people primarily through education and his missionary work. So you had both of them, if you like, Saint Ignatius preaching the importance of the Catholic faith, the Catholic doctrine, externally going out, and then you have Saint Teresa, who is stable in one place, praying and looking at the internal life. So you've got that lovely balance of both. She was really tearing her hair out, coming up against a lot of people saying that the clergy were greedy, obsessed with money, obsessed with the material, and she really, really wanted to say to them, you know, this has to stop, because if you don't have a strong connection with Jesus, your followers can't possibly, therefore how can, in her mind and her dream, how can the rest of the world? Because the people at the front are supposed to be setting an example. So this was her key thing, to really fight for the church. And I imagine she took a lot of inspiration from Elijah and Anthony at this time, taking more time for prayer. A little insight into the daily life in Carmel. Obviously it's been 2 years ago since I left, but I can remember everything because we did the same thing all day, every day, constantly for about 5 months. You begin the day with the Office of Lauds, which is about 6 o'clock in the morning for about half an hour. And then after that, we would have private prayer again for another whole hour. This is your desert time. This is by yourself. And then after that, we would come back into community again and have a short service, the mid-morning service, before Mass. So an awful lot had already been done before 9 o'clock in the morning. You'd already been up for 4 hours. So we had Mass at 8 o'clock for about 45 minutes, and then we would have breakfast. And then you'd have a period of work for about 2 hours. And sometimes this work period was you by yourself, so sometimes I'd have to sew, mend the habits, or I'd be in the garden, or I'd be sorting out the card office, because they have a really thriving card business at Quiddenham. And then after the work period, we would have the midday prayer and the Angelus. Then you would have lunch, we had lunch, and then you could have siesta. So going back to Spanish, you would have the half an hour time in the afternoon if you needed it. Then you'd have more prayer back in the chapel with the sisters, and then another work period, and then the office of Vespers. Following Vespers, this was about 4:30, you would then have another hour of private prayer. So out of community, back into your cell. Again, it's not like prison. They were actually really lovely cells. You would have private prayer. Then you would come out back into community again and have supper. We weren't chatting during supper. It was very, very quiet all the time. And a sister would read from the Bible, or a story. Sometimes we had David Attenborough's nature books, and they were read to us, which was lovely. A little bit of a break from all the religion and all the scripture. Then after supper, we would have the office of readings, and this is recitation of Psalms. Then after readings, you could go and have a little bit of quiet time and then come back for compline. So you can see there's that ebb and flow all through the day between what you're doing on your own and what you're doing in community, up to compline, which was around 9 o'clock in the evening, and then it had to be quiet until Lauds the following morning again, so what called the Great Silence, if you like. And you couldn't speak in that time unless absolutely necessary. So you should sometimes get a bit told off. And I remember one night I screamed in the shower room because there was a huge spider, and the prioress came running up the stairs like, "What sort of noise do you call that? It's a stupid spider." So I learned not to say anything about anything after that night. Just like, right, if anything's wrong, I'm just going to be quiet. No, it's crazy. You know, you're just not allowed, because you can't break the silence for other people. But I think I said to her, spiders are an absolute exception. Who doesn't scream when they see them, really? So very, very quiet in Carmel. The packed day, if you like, all focusing on the importance of the divine office and praying for the needs of the world. Where Our Lady comes into Carmel, as we've said, she is pondering the word of the Lord, pondering the interior. Teresa loved her yes to God. We know Mary at the Annunciation says yes to the Lord. Carmel is very, very much a journey of the heart, a journey deeper into your relationship with Jesus. We didn't have a very obvious Marian look about the monastery. There weren't Marian statues all over the place, so we weren't having a rosary class. It wasn't very obviously Marian, but we did have a statue to Our Lady, and we prayed the Angelus 3 times a day. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd have the Angelus, the succession of Hail Marys. The same thing at noon, the Angelus again, and then at 6 o'clock in the evening before supper, we would pray it again. So it was very Marian, but the key thing was that you ponder everything on the interior. And we had examine as well, which is a very Saint Ignatius, one of the spiritual exercises, where you think about how you're doing during the day and how are you affecting other people in the monastery, how is your behaviour. So you feel like a little checklist of your personality that day, if you like. So not obviously Marian, but some of the sisters would take a rosary and pray in the garden. Again, it was very private. We weren't doing things together very much at all. It was absolutely the desert experience. And I was so grateful to Teresa for her influence on these previous characters we've talked about, and also founding at least 17 monasteries in her lifetime. She did a wonderful job. She came up against a lot of, as we've said, a lot of negativity from people, but it was 2 really wonderful Jesuit priests who said to her at the time, you know, you must go about on this mission, founding other monasteries. A lot of people, she saw about 28 confessors in her lifetime, and she wasn't happy with any one of them hearing her confession. She just didn't think they were strong enough or good enough to manage what she was actually seeing and her visions and what she was feeling. But it was two Jesuit priests that said to her, what you're seeing is not coming from the devil, it's real. We have to go about on this mission. So she received cardinal approval, papal approval, everything came through for her in the end. She founded 17 monasteries in her lifetime, and in 1969 she was declared the first woman doctor of the church. And I think it's about a week or so after that Saint Catherine of Siena was also declared a doctor of the church. So we have so much to thank Teresa for in her work, fighting for the church, fighting for the Catholic faith, fighting for the doctrine and the importance of prayer. There's a wonderful quote she said in her book, The Way of Perfection, which is written for her sisters at the time, and I was going through it with Sister Margaret when I was a postulant, saying we have to remember the early hermits, the early desert fathers, and strive to be more like them because they have so much to offer. So really her message is, be out and be sociable, have your community time, but don't forget that you also need to have your desert time, because if you don't have your desert time, the Lord can't get into you just as much, as much as he would like to, in the way that we have God 24 hours a day. And that's really what monastic life actually stands for. These buildings, they're great lighthouses, if you like. People call them the lungs of the church. They are there to say that God exists, and the women and the men in there are saying, I am dedicating my life to God for you, because prayer is apostolic. They believe that what they are doing is going out and feeding the world. Even though they take a vow of stability and they're living in one place, they believe what they're doing, their thoughts and prayers are going out and serving absolutely everyone. So it's a great light, and I was so grateful that I had time in a monastery to learn more about that, to learn more about the importance of the prayer and the importance of the faith.